On Christmas Eve, my wife said, "I'm leaving you for another man." She had no idea. This is the story of Marcus Bennett and his wife, Claire Bennett. She said it the way someone announces a flight delay. Inconvenient, unfortunate, but ultimately inevitable. "I'm leaving you, Marcus. For someone else." The Christmas tree was still lit behind her, all those warm amber bulbs doing their patient, indifferent work. There was no trembling in her voice, no hesitation. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she was delivering news to a man who had already, quietly, begun to grieve something else entirely. The ornament she picked every year was a small brass compass. She'd bought it at a street market in Vermont the winter before we married, and every December she'd unwrap it from its tissue paper like it was something sacred, hold it up, say north, as a kind of private joke I'd stopped understanding around year 4. I still laughed. I want to be honest about that. We had been married 11 years, long enough to stop noticing each other the way strangers notice each other. Long enough that our silences had developed their own grammar, some comfortable, some not, and a few that had recently taken on a new quality I couldn't name yet. Like a sound just outside the register of hearing. You don't know it's there, but something in your body responds to it. Claire was a landscape architect. She dealt in deliberate beauty, in the precise placement of things, so that people would feel a certain way walking through spaces. There was always something I admired about that. Something I also, if I'm truthful, found slightly alienating. The way she could look at our backyard and see not what was there but what should be. I sometimes wondered if she did that with me too. I worked in commercial insurance risk assessment. The irony, in retrospect, is not lost on me. Our friends described us as solid, stable, the reliable ones. We hosted Thanksgiving. We remembered anniversaries. We did not, as far as anyone could see, fight. What they didn't see was that we had also, somewhere in the past 2 or 3 years, quietly stopped talking, not arguing, just the deeper conversations, the ones where you say a thing you've never said aloud before. Those had tapered off, replaced by logistics, schedules, the necessary vocabulary of a shared household. We had no children. That had been a decision we made together, and then separately began to feel differently about, and then never revisited out loud. Her name in my phone was still Claire Bear, a relic from early years I'd never bothered to change. I noticed that in October, when she texted to say she'd be late for dinner, and I looked at the notification and felt, not warmth exactly, more like looking at a photograph of warmth. The secondary character entered naturally, the way these things always do, without ceremony. His name was Derek Holloway. She'd mentioned him first in September. A client of hers, a landscape renovation project for a property developer. She said he was interesting, said it casually, the way you mention weather. I registered it, and then I didn't. By November, Derek Holloway had been mentioned enough times to have taken on a kind of shape. He had opinions about architecture and wine, and had apparently spent 2 years living in Lisbon. Claire had never wanted to go to Lisbon. She suddenly wanted to go to Lisbon. One evening she laughed at something on her phone. A real laugh, the unguarded kind, the kind that comes before you can arrange your face. I was reading on the other end of the couch, and I watched her and I thought, I haven't made her laugh like that in a while. I went back to my book. That was the moment. Not explosive, not cinematic, just a small, sharp thing, like a piece of glasses you find in your sock. You don't know how it got there. You just know it broke somewhere. December arrived the way it always does in our house, with Claire pulling boxes from the hall closet, the smell of pine needles, the same playlist she'd had since 2014. I carried the tree in. She directed its placement with the same professional precision she used for everything spatial. 2 inches left. No, back, there. We decorated on a Saturday afternoon. She handed me the brass compass ornament last, the way she always did, and I hung it near the top and said north. And she smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere. I started noticing things, not in an obsessive way. More the way you start noticing a leak, not when it begins, but when the water stain on the ceiling gets large enough to acknowledge. Her phone, face down more often, a new perfume she hadn't mentioned buying. The way she'd started coming home from meetings looking like someone who had just returned from somewhere real, and then had to recalibrate back into the life of our house. I didn't confront her. I want to explain that because I know how it reads. It reads like passivity, like cowardice maybe. But it wasn't quite either of those things. It was more that I had begun, unconsciously at first, then with a creeping deliberateness, to prepare. I moved some money to a separate savings account I'd had from before we married, quietly topping it back up over 3 months. Not out of spite, not as a weapon, just a form of emotional triage I couldn't quite articulate yet. I stopped mentioning future plans, stopped saying next summer or when we finally redo the kitchen. I began existing slightly more in the present tense. She didn't notice, or she noticed and was relieved. One night, I sat across from her at dinner and had the strange, dissociative thought that I was watching us from somewhere outside the room. 2 people, well-dressed in a well-decorated home, eating a meal neither of them had wanted to make. And I thought, I don't know if she's still mine or if I'm still hers. And I think I've known that for a while now. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. I looked up and said, "Does any of this feel strange to you lately?" She looked at me. "I don't know," I said. Use the "I don't know." Maybe like this story or subscribe or something. She blinked. "What? Nothing," I said. "Sorry, I think I'm tired." She watched me for a second longer than necessary, then looked back at her plate. The moment closed over itself, like water. I started sleeping better after that, which should have concerned me more than it did. Something I've come to understand about myself. I grieve quietly and in advance. It's not a virtue. It's a pattern, some childhood-installed coping mechanism that kicks in before the actual loss, that begins the process of detachment before the formal ending arrives. By the time Claire said what she said on Christmas Eve, I had been, in some real emotional sense, leaving for about 60 days. I had also, without quite planning to, begun spending more time alone in a way that felt not happy exactly, but accurate. Christmas Eve, she'd spent the afternoon at a client consultation. I made dinner anyway, rack of lamb, the good wine, the table set the way she liked it, not because I was performing hope, more because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. She came home at 7:14. I know the time because I just checked the oven. She set her bag down by the door. She didn't take off her coat right away, which I noted but didn't say anything about. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table, and then at me with an expression that was not quite guilty and not quite resolved. Somewhere in between, some emotional state that doesn't have a clean name. "That smells good," she said. "It should be ready in 10 minutes. She nodded. Then, "Marcus, I need to say something." The coat still on, standing in the doorway. "All right," I said. She was watching me like she was already managing my reaction, preparing for it. There was a particular quality to the way she straightened slightly, the way her hands came together in front of her, like someone stepping to a podium. "I'm leaving you," she said. "There's someone else. It's been serious for a while, and I should have said something sooner, and I'm sorry. But I can't keep doing this." The lamb was almost certainly done. I turned to the oven. "Marcus, I heard you." I opened the oven door, checked the temperature, closed it. "Do you want to eat first or did you hear what I said?" "Claire," I turned around. "I heard you." She looked at me with something shifting behind her eyes, not relief, not cruelty. Something more like the specific disorientation of being a locksmith who arrives to pick a lock and finds the door already open. "You're not," she stopped. "You're not going to say anything?" I thought about it, genuinely. "I think," I said slowly, "that I've known something was wrong for a long time. I don't think I know how to be angry at you right now." "Derek," she said, as if the name might change something. "His name is Derek. I know his name." A long pause. The kitchen clock. Outside, snow had begun, the first real snow of the season, which we'd both been quietly waiting for. "How long have you known?" "I don't know exactly," I said. "Long enough." She sat down at the table then, still in her coat, not like someone who'd delivered a verdict, like someone who'd just realized the verdict had already been delivered without her. I poured 2 glasses of wine. I set one in front of her. She didn't say thank you, and I didn't expect her to. "I won't make this ugly," I said. "If that's what you're worried about." I wasn't worried about that. Okay. The snow outside was doing its quiet thing. The lamb needed another 3 minutes. Somewhere in the living room, the tree lights blinked on their timer, soft and amber and indifferent. She said, "You seem?" "I know how I seem." She wrapped both hands around the wine glass. "I thought you'd be more." "I know what you thought." She was gone by New Year's. It was efficient, as these things go. She took what she'd mentally already claimed, her desk, the Vermont compass ornament, the Belgian linen duvet, a painting of the coast her mother had given us that I'd never particularly liked. I helped carry boxes to her car the first trip. We didn't speak much, but it wasn't hostile. It was the quiet of 2 people being careful with each other, which is maybe its own kind of tenderness. Derek Holloway had a house in the northern suburbs. 2 stories, apparently. Good bones. I heard these things not through any particular effort, just the peripheral information that moves through shared social circles, whether you want it to or not. Claire had told the version where she'd finally been brave enough to leave a marriage that had stopped working. It wasn't untrue exactly. It just had a different center of gravity than the version I carried. That's the thing about endings. They don't have a single story. They have as many stories as people who need to survive them. I won't pretend the spring was fine. It wasn't. There were nights that were long and airless, dinners I didn't bother making, a general unmooring that I hadn't fully anticipated despite all my careful emotional preparation. Detaching in advance is not the same as not grieving. I'd known the ship was sinking. Knowing hadn't made the water warmer. But there was also, and this surprised me, a clarifying quality to the quiet. I ate differently, slept at odd hours, watched films I'd always meant to watch and hadn't because Claire found subtitles annoying. I took a long weekend in March and drove to Vermont, to the same town where she'd bought the compass, and I didn't feel maudlin about it, just curious. Like I was retracing to route to see where I'd taken a wrong turn, not with blame, but with genuine interest in the geography. I called my brother more. He's 3 years younger than me, recently divorced himself, and we had the kind of long calls we hadn't had since our 20s. The ones that move through several topics without agenda. He said once, "You seem different." I mean that as a positive. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just said, "I think I am a bit." Claire, I understood from the social periphery, had begun reshaping the narrative, not viciously, but with the subtle editorial instinct of someone managing a story they needed to be the protagonist of. The version that circulated had her as someone finally choosing herself, someone who had stayed too long in something that didn't fit. People were supportive. People are usually supportive of whoever tells them first. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't have a version I was particularly invested in circulating. There was a day in April, late afternoon, the kind of slanted gold light that makes ordinary rooms look significant. When I sat in the living room and realized that the space where the painting used to hang didn't bother me anymore. The wall had just become a wall again. That was the turning point, I think. Not dramatic. Just a weight I'd gotten so accustomed to that I'd forgotten it was there. And then it wasn't. And the absence of it was its own quiet revelation. We met for coffee in May. Her suggestion, which surprised me. A place near her new office. I hadn't been to this part of the city in years. She was there before me, which was unlike her. Sitting at a corner table with her hands around a cup, and she looked fine. That was the truest word. Fine. And slightly searching, and like someone who had been expecting to feel better by now. She looked good. I want to be honest about that too. We talked for about an hour. Easy enough on the surface. Work, mutual friends, the apartment she was looking at. Derek had been mentioned once and then passed over quickly, which I noted but didn't pursue. At some point she asked, "Are you seeing anyone?" "Not yet," I said. She nodded. A pause. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Christmas Eve." "Okay." You weren't surprised. It wasn't a question. I looked at my coffee. "No. How long?" Her voice was careful, not accusatory. Genuinely asking. "Since August, probably. Maybe earlier." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary noon-hour thing. People with lunches, a delivery bike, the unremarkable machinery of a city that doesn't pause for personal revelations. She stopped. I thought I was the one ending it. You were. But you'd already, yes. She looked at me with something I recognized as the specific discomfort of realizing that your departure was witnessed, differently than you'd staged it. That the audience you'd imagined had already folded their programs and found their coats before the final act. It's not a comfortable feeling. I knew it from the other direction. "Does that bother you?" I asked. That I wasn't more broken? She thought about it, actually thought about it, which was one of the things I'd always respected about her, even near the end. "I think," she said carefully, "I wanted to matter more in the moment. I think I wanted it to cost you more than it appeared to." "It cost me," I said. "It just cost me in a different season." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her cup. "I think I arrived late," she said quietly. "Yes," she nodded. "Just once." We finished our coffees. We hugged briefly at the door, the kind of hug that is mostly architecture, mostly shape, and then she turned toward her office and I turned toward the parking lot, and the city absorbed us both without comment. I sat in my car for a minute before starting it. The compass had always pointed north. I just hadn't been paying attention to where north was taking us, or how far I'd already traveled before I noticed the needle had changed. I started the car. I drove home,